When the sons of Rogel Dorn were divided after the Horus Heresy, the former Imperial Fist Legion became the chapters of today. Though arguably the zealous Black Templars covered in a previous log are the more infamous of those who aren't the Imperial Fists themselves, the other second founding chapter have become renowned and idolized in their own way. They are the only one of the original second founding chapters not to be currently fleet-based, having taken a homeworld but then nearly being wiped out during its defense. They are, in a way, lucky to still be around today for reasons other than war, as their current chapter master had to keep the High Lords of Terror from disbanding them due to the sheer lack of numbers. Now, they have been rebuilt, in no small part thanks to the new Primaris Space Marines, and they continue to stir with distinction to this day. First led by Alexis Polux, a renowned captain of the Imperial Fist Legion, and now led by Lord Hellblade Pedro Cantor, they are the Crimson Fists. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. The Iron Cage incident after the Horus Heresy broke and tempered the Imperial Fists, allowing them to be divided into chapters according to Robert Guilliman's Codex Astartes. However, within the 7th Legion, opinions remained divided on the Codex, and Dorn used these as the lines along which his sons would be split. Thus, Sigismund and the most vehement opponents of the Codex would form the Black Templars, whilst those most in favour were placed under the command of Alexis Polux to form the Crimson Fists. I have told Pollux's tale in full elsewhere when we looked at the 7th Legion in our mini-series, but in brief, he was a renowned commander from the Battle of Fal and the Wars in Imperium Secundus, known for being level-headed. This was the second defining trait of all Crimson Fists, at least in the early days, a calm head and rational thinking, basically the complete opposite of the Black Templars then, even beyond opinions on the Codex. As for the name, it is drawn from an old ritual within the Imperial Fist Legion. When a new chapter master ascends to the rank, or at least the equivalent of it, I'm unsure if the Fist had a different title, he and Dorn would cut their palms and share a bloodied handshake. Whether said ritual exists today without Dorn around I cannot say, though if anyone were to maintain it, it would be the Crimson Fist, perhaps when captains are elected, if anything. The Crimson Fist is not only a name, it is the heraldry of the chapter as well as a part of their ranking system. Though the armour of the Crimson Fist is a midnight blue, all Astartes will have both their gloves, hands, gauntlets painted in red instead. For scouts, only the left hand is permitted to be red until they are promoted into the main ranks. Like the Black Templars and later the Imperial Fists themselves, the Crimson Fist did not take a homeworld following their conception, instead serving as a crusading chapter and winning their first ever victory against the force of Exodite Eldar on the world of Uralak Prime. Their flagship/base of operations was the fortress monastery Rutilus Tyrannus, but unlike the legendary Phalanx or Eternal Crusader, we know pretty much nothing about it besides its name. In fact, we don't know any ship in the chapter fleet, especially since Pollux had been forced to abandon his own flagship during the Battle of Fal. Such was the arrangement for about 800 years with Pollux at the helm, until he was killed in combat with the poison-wielding Scythians. Admittedly, the retribution of the Crimson Fist pretty much annihilated said Xenos in response to the point that they've never been a threat since. We don't know his immediate successor as chapter master, unfortunately, but we do know that at the time of the War of the Beast, an Astartes named Caesardra was in command. Who knows, maybe he was the second chapter master and we just don't have the proof. He was the one who met with the rest of the Fist's successors when the Last War Protocol was invoked, effectively reforming the 7th Legion, but he was killed during the first attempted invasion of Ullanor. Such were the losses of the Crimson Fist in that engagement that Caesadra's successor was actually a sergeant called Quarian, who helped oversee the defense of Terra alongside the remainder of his chapter, the Iron Knights, and the Excoriators, whilst Lord Commander Courland led the second charge of Ullanor and also died in the attempt. Following this, Chapter Master of the Fist Exemplar Maximus Thane asked the Last War chapters to contribute some of their own strength to rebuild the Imperial Fist who had been wiped out on Ullanor, before taking up the position of Chapter Master of this new force. Assuming equal contributions, Quarian and the Crimson Fist will have given over 160 or so battle brothers to their Primogenitor, despite their own heavy losses. One then assumes that it was this depleted Crimson Fist contingent that saw out the rest of the War of the Beast, though Quarian himself is not stated as being involved in it or in the beheading that followed. In fact, the tale of the Crimson Fist as a whole goes pretty quiet for a while after this point, but their most famous campaign was the Crusade of Righteous Liberation that recaptured a swathe of worlds following the Age of Apostasy. Whether they led it, how many worlds they personally claimed, I sadly don't know. As a result of said crusade, the Crimson Fist were actually reduced to only 128 Battle Brothers, and so the first company is kept at 128 members and known as the Crusade Company to this day in what is perhaps the only deviation from the Codex Astartes. The leader of this company, and thus assumedly the first captain, is also always the chapter master. In more recent times, the Greenskins have become familiar with the Crimson Fists, and the Voltigern Crusade of M40 was the catalyst for the Sons of Pollux to actually settle down. After destabilizing the various Orc holdings in the Loki sector, the agri-world of Rinnsworld was given over to the Crimson Fists, a somewhat isolated but prosperous planet that, despite the Astartes having a base of operations there, is not run by the chapter and in fact has its own planetary governor. The Crimson Fist did not even recruit from Rinnsworld, even though I'm sure the adoring populace would be more than willing to join up. Instead, the Fists used nearby feral worlds for recruitment, as is sort of standard practice for Space Marines. Their fortress monastery at the time, Arx Tyrannus, was said to have been constructed from a damaged battle barge, so I have to wonder whether if the rootless Tyrannus was in fact retired when the Crimson Fist arrived, while still serving as the chapter's headquarters despite being unusable as a ship. However, though Rinnsworld has now spent 1,000 years or so under the watchful eye of the Sons of Pollux, the Astartes' presence has served to make the isolated planet a target on more than one occasion. The most notable of these incidents was, of course, the Orc invasion led by none other than the arch-arsonist of Sharadan. In 998 M41, or maybe just before, the world of Badlanding was attacked by the Crimson Fist to delay and monitor a growing Orc war under Warlord Snagrod that had recently invaded the planet. For those who don't know of Snagrod, he is known as the Arch-Arsonist of Sharadan, an immortal persona renowned for leaving worlds burned in his wake. He actually isn't immortal, but if the Arch-Arsonist is killed, his successor takes the mantle, so pseudo-immortal. Unfortunately, the Astartes underestimated the Greenskins and were defeated pretty comprehensively, losing over half of their company sent, including the captain. To be fair, they were underinformed due to the clever elimination of astropaths by the Orcs, meaning that emergency messages from a commissar were all the Crimson Fists had to go on. Either shocked by the failure or nervous of the war's proximity to Rinnsworld, the raids of the chapter throughout the region were called off, and the Crimson Fist gathered in their entirety on their homeworld. The invasion that followed of Rinnsworld was, to put a long story short, utterly devastating. Some have described the force of Snagrod's war as the greatest in recent times beside Ghazkul's invasions of Armageddon, and even with a full chapter of Astartes present, the Orcs were considered a significant threat. However, one would still likely back the Crimson Fist to carry the day, especially backed up with formidable surface-to-space missile defences. Unfortunately, something went wrong. Seriously wrong. Either through a 1 in a trillion glitch or a failure, or according to some through the work of the Officio Assassinorum, one of the plasma missiles in the defense system malfunctioned and, rather than land harmlessly or strike the Orcs, hit the fortress monastery of the Crimson Fists. Almost everyone in the Arx Tyrannus was killed, including the entirety of the chapter's serfs and over 600 Astartes. Only 16 of the Marines actually based there survived. Combined with the early battles of the invasion, this left just 218 Crimson Fists to defend Rinnsworld, and the entire planet was lost with the exception of the planetary capital, New Rin City. Amazingly, despite the entire war being arrayed against them, this small force was able to survive for over 18 months of siege, though being Imperial Fist successors, perhaps this is no surprise. At some point, the chapter master was called out and challenged one-on-one by Snagrod himself, but whether this was an intense part of the early siege or towards its end, I cannot be 100% sure. What is known, however, is that Snagrod absolutely lost. His personal force field generator was damaged and he was badly wounded, but he managed to escape before being killed. I assume this was the final stage of the siege, because the defeat of the Arch-Arsonists would have seriously hurt the order amongst the Greenskins, a fact only compounded by the retribution of the Imperium in the form of over 2,000 ships and elements of 6 Astartes chapters. Suffice it to say, Rinnsworld was liberated once again, though as ever with Orcs, getting rid of them for good is, well, let's just say problematic. In fact, 6 months after the siege was lifted and the world was back in Imperial hands, the Battle of Traitor's Gorge took place, as 24 or so Astartes were ambushed whilst trying to deal with Orc raiders who had fled. With the chapter's air support still out of commission, the chapter master and all his forces would have actually been wiped out, but salvation came from an unexpected quarter. Rangers of the Eldar craft world Alatok, led by the Farseer Eldorath Starbane, attacked the Orcs and effectively allowed the pendulum to swing back to the Crimson Fists. The reason for this intercession are totally unknown to all save the Eldar, as Starbane did not hang around to explain and has yet to call in a favour from the Astartes as payment for saving them. As Starbane has battled on 2 separate occasions with the resurgent Necrons, I suspect he wanted a strong and ready Crimson Fist force in that region of space, having foreseen Necron activity. But, as it's the Eldari, especially the Asayani and their Farseers, I have no concrete proof. When the dust finally cleared on Rin's world, only around 100 Crimson Fists were left alive, and plans were made by the High Lords of Terror for the chapter to be disbanded, especially since their gene seed stock had been destroyed in the missile strike. But through the efforts of the aforementioned chapter master, the Crimson Fist survived. As of the events known as the Gathering Storm, the chapter had recovered up to about half strength, but following the return of Robert Gilliman and the creation of the Cicatrix Maledictum, Rin's world was like many other planets across the galaxy, besieged and struggling to stay alive. The forces of chaos here were led by a demon prince known as Raxor, but sadly we know nothing of their origins, alignment, or abilities, which is kind of annoying. We do know the Crimson Fists were outnumbered, no surprises there, but they were able to hold out long enough for the cavalry to come once again. And this cavalry was special indeed, the Indomitus Crusade and the Primaris Space Marines already bearing the heraldry of the Crimson Fist and sharing the lineage of their older cousins. When the battle was won, the Crimson Fist readily accepted the Primaris Marines into their ranks, and not only because it was the common sense thing to do, given they still likely had little to no gene seed stock. To the quote-unquote regular Astartes, the Primaris are a step closer to the ideals of Rogul Dorn, and in a way, they're kind of not wrong. The Sang Primus Portum used by Call to craft the Primaris Marines allows for a more potent gene seed than the current stock, meaning they are more akin to their Primarch than their cousins, at least on a genetic level. As a result, a good portion of the Crimson Fist are probably now Primaris Marines, but I lack exact figures unfortunately for both raw numbers and percentages. Perhaps unsurprisingly, they have sworn vengeance on all of Orcdom for the defilement of Rin's world, and with reinforcements now present, I suspect they may well have a word or a bolt round ready for the Arch-Arsonist in the not-too-distant future. The 29th and current chapter master of the Crimson Fists, also in command for the invasion of Rin's world, is Pedro Cantor, also known as Lord Hellblade, though I have no explanation for why. None of his weapons are even remotely blade-like. Ah well. Believed to be around 300 or 400 years old at the close of M41, his first known action was, conveniently given what came later, against Orcs in the Battle of Melchit Sound. He was already a sergeant by this time, leading a boarding assault that took down a greenskin cruiser, allowing the Imperials to win the engagement. His path to chapter master is not particularly well documented, unfortunately, but we do know several engagements he fought in, at least by name. Incidents such as the Cardian campaign and the defence of Fortress Maladon will likely mean much to the Crimson Fists, but sadly, we only know their names, not what happened. Eventually, Cantor attained the rank of first captain as head of the Crusade Company, and thus he became the chapter master. This happened in about 900 M41, meaning that by the time of Rin's world's invasion, he had about a century of leadership under his belt. During said invasion, he was actually at Arx Tyrannus when it was destroyed, but due to being on an inspection when the missile struck, he was able to survive the loss of the fortress monastery. He then rallied the few remaining survivors, again about 16 if you remember earlier, and led them to rendezvous with the rest of the world's defenders at New Rin City. As already mentioned, he fought Snagrod himself at the height of the siege, defeating the warlord but failing to slay the Arch-Arsonist, and he was also involved in the ambush at Traitor's Gorge. He was actually the only one left unwounded by the battle. Unlike his Primarch all those millennia ago, Cantor has proved to be a reasonable politician as well, able to stave off the disbanding of the Crimson Fist by the High Lords of Terror through either political manoeuvring or some other clever means. He also showed why he's a chapter master in a tactical sense, as he's been carefully able to marshal his chapter's strength without risking or expending their lives. It is said that conservation of force as opposed to an all-out glorious assault is a difficult concept for a Space Marine to both grasp and accept, but Cantor has done exactly that, ensuring his elite warriors can inflict as much damage as possible whilst minimizing the possibility of casualties. It may have been a bitter pill to swallow, but it helped save Rin's world and has assumedly helped the Crimson Fist grow afterwards. During the invasion by Raxor and Chaos, Cantor was forced to, or chose to, lead 3 separate sallies, driving the enemy back and buying time, even if it may not have been enough in the long run. Without it, I don't know if Rin's world would have held. In fact, when the Indomitus Crusade did arrive to liberate Rin's world, Guilliman was incredibly complimentary of Cantor's efforts and ideals.
Rogel Dorn thought there was no higher purpose to the existence of the Astartes than the unification of mankind. I see that in you also, and his determination. I need men who fight bravely even when faced with great tragedy. I have seen with my own eyes in recent days how you inspire intense loyalty in those around you, and I see you hold duty above glory or vengeance. My brother would be proud.
Following the rebuilding/reinforcement of the Crimson Fist with the Primaris Marines, the actions of both Cantor and his chapter are still being played out. Where he is now, I cannot be sure, but if he's not either on Rin's world or somewhere in the Arch-Arsonist territory, I'd be slightly surprised, especially with the Indomitus Crusade officially being over with the Plague Wars. As concerns weaponry, Cantor wields a unique storm bolter named Dorn's Arrow alongside his Power Fist. A wrist-mounted weapon, it has an increased rate of fire and better armor penetration when compared to a normal storm bolter, but whether the weapon has a direct link to Dorn, as in did he wield it or something, or is it simply named after him, that unfortunately I cannot be sure about. To conclude, we shall look at a few more famous members of the Crimson Fist, as well as notable engagements they fought in down the millennia. The first of these battles is probably what Cantor considers the blackest mark upon the chapter, or at least on their honour. The Crimson Fist, for reasons I'm yet to discern, have close ties with the Inquisition, often contributing to the Death Watch, and they've actually been responsible for the destruction of 2 entire Astartes chapters, the Sons of Gideon and the Marines Vigilant. Though the former had descended into madness and heresy, so justifiable, the latter didn't even try to defend themselves, simply accepting their fate after retreating to their homeworld unknown. The Crimson Fist were reluctant to actually carry out the execution order, and to this day Cantor considers it incredibly distasteful. An undated campaign waged against the Orcs is the Decletes Crusade, fought alongside the Black Templars after the Crimson Fist began to lose ground. The crusade was centered on the defense of the Forge World Decletes 4 and the Hive World Decletes 5, and ultimately the critical blow was struck by the sons of Sigismund, whose Emperor's champion was able to slay the war boss Gitsmot, leading the Greenskins. What makes the campaign interesting is that the 2 Imperial Fist successors actually mixed their squads and shared iconography in the campaign, with the Black Templars painting their gauntlets red and the Crimson Fist painting the Templar symbol on their knee pad. Speaking of successors, the Crimson Fist have also had a run-in with the Soul Drinkers, who supposedly are the other second founding chapter descended from the Imperial Fists. This took place on Endymion 4, which was under the sway of Dark Eldar at the time, and the Soul Drinkers were present to deal with the corner-lined battle brother Telos. The initial Fist force was relatively small, but after the appearance of their cousins, more and more resources were committed. Unfortunately for them, they were manipulated by their not quite loyal, not quite traitor cousins into attacking the Dark Eldar directly before the Soul Drinkers made their escape. And they actually lost. The planet was lost, the warp leaked into reality. Didn't go so well. There are many more engagements involving the Crimson Fist, perhaps too many to count given their 10,000-year history, and in that time, heroes have come and gone. Though we know little to nothing of them, we do know the names of a few more chapter masters. The 16th and 17th were known as Algernon Tragus and Clede Sargo, but their notable campaigns and personalities, sadly, are unknown. We know a little more of Cardova, known to be chapter master during the Crusade of Righteous Liberation that followed the Age of Apostasy, but given only 13% of the chapter was left alive afterwards, it makes it likely he was killed at some point, either that or he orchestrated the rebuilding operation that followed, one or the other. In more recent times, there is one particularly famous captain who rose through the ranks alongside Pedro Cantor, Captain Alessio Cortez. He has supposedly had every bone in his body, save 2, broken at least once, and is renowned for being pretty much impossible to kill. I can see where the reputation comes from, quite frankly, with that much damage. He was at Cantor's side during many of his early engagements, most notably defending a breach in the Fortress Maladon for 21 hours straight. Not quite matching Marneus Calgar's record of a day straight alone against the Orcs, but still damn impressive. Cortez was also at Arx Tyrannus on Rin's world when it was destroyed, but was of course among the 16 survivors because, got an immortality reputation to live up to and all. I know he was further involved in the battles at New Rin City, though I don't believe he was at Traitor's Gorge, but I cannot remember exactly what his contribution was to the war. I guess all those warp drips will be finally getting to my cursed memory. He's currently listed as missing in action, having disappeared during a battle with Eldar raiders. Cantor firmly believes that Cortez is still alive, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was, given everything else he's managed to survive, but whether he'll be back with his brothers anytime soon, I unfortunately cannot say. Finally, let us look at one of the many Crimson Fists to join the Death Watch, a watch captain now on his 5th service with the Chamber Militant of the Ordo Xenos. His name is Esteban de Dominova, a renowned apothecary and xenobiologist known to have worked alongside the Magos Biologis in the past. He appears to be based out of, or at least answerable to, Watch Fortress Eriok, a place known to contain the almost mythical Omega Vault and home to many different Xenos prisoners from a multitude of races. Dominova is considered by many to be a recluse, but service under him gradually reveals him to be both intellectual and passionate. Supposedly he speaks 12 languages fluently, and his humour seems to be as dry as, well, whatever the driest place in the Imperium is. Maybe Armageddon? Talon? Actually, maybe Terra, since that place has to import its own water. Honestly, if he weren't a space marine who'd rather shoot me than talk, I'd love to chat with this guy. His intellect and his humour would make him a worthy source of conversation, and I'm sure he knows so much, having served alongside the Death Watch. Ah well. So end the tales of the Crimson Fists. The sons of Alexis Polux are as loyal and unwavering as their founder, able to survive against even the most overwhelming of odds in the direst of circumstances. Though they have danced with extinction on numerous occasions, they have always come back stronger and ready for another go. Thanks to the works of Call and Gilliman, they now stand defiant and whole once more, and were Rogul Dorn around today, I can all but guarantee that he would have immense pride in the actions and mindset of his successors. Now, it is time to hit the regimental road once more, and since we've been talking about the renowned Orc killers amongst the Astartes, I think it's only fair we do the same for the Astra Militarum. Fasten your seatbelt and pray the stealth system works, as we're heading into what was, and perhaps still is, the largest war zone and meat grinder of the modern age. For now though, we shall bid Rin's world adieu and end this log. Thank you all for watching, my name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.